Dr. Hussein Ahdieh is the author of Awakening, a history of the Bábi and Baha'i faiths in Nayriz. So let's just talk a little bit about this book, because you're dealing with a subject that is foreign to many people, certainly this history, and then the part of the world that we're talking about is also obscure to many as well. So tell us a little bit about where exactly is Nayriz, and what is this story that you're telling in the book?
I am from Nayriz. Is a village in the south of Iran, or Persia, I prefer to call it, because when you say Persia, it's remind you of Persian cat, rubaiyat, and all that. So Persia is my country. It's about 200 kilometers from a big city of Shiraz, and many people are familiar with that town because some great poets came from there. Hussein Ahdieh, and of course one of our prophets, Bábi, has come from Shiraz.
And that's within the Baha'i faith.
Within the Baha'i faith, yes. And the history that I wrote is about and the reason I call it Awakening is because the Nayriz was a small town in the as I said, not far from Shiraz. And with the call of the Bábi and coming of Wahid, his main disciple, they really woke up to new reality. And they were waiting for the promised one to come anyway. And the moment they hear that he's here, they all rise up in his support.
So what time period are we talking about here?
Talking about the mid-19th century. The Bábi made his declaration in 1844, and so for a period of 6-7 years, his ministry lasted. Eventually, they killed him, and within that period, thousands of his followers also were put to death. And one of the places that the major massacre took happened was in Nayriz. Half the population of the city became Bábi, and then the other half, they were against them, of course, and the government were against them. So major battles took place in that town, and the book I have written is all about what took place at that time.
You have a very personal connection. You mentioned that you grew up in the town of Nayriz. So how did you launch the decision to do the research that you've done to produce Awakening? My family historically were very much involved in this movement, because when in 1850s, or when the Wahid, the major disciple of the Bábi, came to Nayriz, my ancestors were very close to him. And what you have in Islam, you have either a leader, which they call him mujtahid, and or you are a follower, which is 99% of population. Now, my ancestors were always part of the mujtahids. They were leader of the religious community. And when Wahid came to town, because of his friendship with them and all that, they became Bábi. And since they were in control of the mosque and all the other activity of folks, them becoming Bábi led to the majority of people become Bábi. So the family history contains tremendous number of stories, and some of them legends, and some of them maybe made up things of their sacrifices, and good number of them, of course, gave their lives for the cause. This story was repeated again and again in the family, and I remember I used to hear it as a child. Then I always been interested in history in general, but especially Bábi history. That's my so I decided finally to put some of this, what I have read and what I was told, in the form of a book. That's why you have Awakening, and it really covered almost 100 years of history of persecution in that town. And I want to emphasize that the Nayriz, even though it's unique in terms of number of people who gave up their life, but it's really part of the overall persecution of this religious minority. It started with Bábi in 1844, and then led to the Baha'is. Even in today's contemporary history, still Baha'i community in that
country are persecuted and subject to all kind of harassment by the government and by clergy. Once out of the mountain, they went toward the mill. A 14-year-old boy walked behind his mother with his hand tied to her waist. He asked why he was tied to her. She told him that if the soldiers took him and killed him, she wanted to be there so she wouldn't spend the rest of her life wandering and waiting. She carried her other, much younger son in her arms. Following her husband's advice, before he had been killed, she had put on her plainest, coarsest clothes in anticipation of being captured by soldiers. On her younger boy, though, she had accidentally left a hat with little ornaments on it. A cavalryman rode up, leaned down, and snatched it off with such a violence that her body was thrown from her arms. His small body landing on the hard ground many feet away from her. She ran to him in panic and picked him up. He was unconscious, a bald spot on his head where his hair had been torn out by the violent grab. She cradled him on her arm, trying desperately to revive him, kneeling on the ground, enveloping his little body just like when she had his birth, when he stopped breathing. This is the story of a young boy and her brother and his brother and the mother and a capture. One thing I'd like to emphasize that the many historical work that has been done about Nayriz by Baha'i and non-Baha'i historians, they always deal with men. Men were brave, men were waged war, men were killed, which of course many of them were. There are not that many stories about women and children. And I'm very concerned about that. So what I decided to do, there are some stories about some brave women and some what they have done throughout that history. So we are making a CD. A couple of wonderful friends I have who are singers and musicians, they're putting 10 songs together about this woman and children. And hopefully that would complement the book, which is all about men. So that's
Of course, these events are extraordinarily tragic, and so I'm curious about the title of your book, Awakening. That sounds like there's a lot of hope there.
Awakening, somebody said, why don't you just call it History of Bábi Baha'i Faith in Nayriz? But awakening, I think it has a connotation that you awaken to new reality. It has some religious meaning also. The town of Nayriz and the Persia as a whole was really in the lowest ebb that they could have reached in terms of corruption and misery and all that. And the coming of this Sayyid, young Sayyid named Báb, it bring them out of their 1,000 years of sleeping.
Now, looking at Awakening, why did you feel that it was so important to put this much research and effort into a project about a few martyrs in a very remote part of the world?
I began to realize that the next generation and generation that would follow them, unless there are some material available for them, all this history is going to be forgotten. And I thought, really, maybe a selfish point of view, I could be the last one who could do it, because I have come from that town. I have experience. I knew the language. I had the materials, and I somehow learned my ways in America. So it was a good opportunity to do a good deed. And as some of my friends said, this is a good passage to heaven. So I hope it helps.
Well, God